Okay, well, good morning. I think this is going to be a fun topic, and we might run a little bit over, so I'll get started 1 or 2 minutes early here. So welcome, it's good to see everyone. This is the panel, Creating OTT Apps for Connected Devices. And we've got just a great group of panelists here. My name is Mark Donegan. I am the general manager for a company called Dune HD. We're in the OTT set-top box business. This is one of our latest creations. It's great when you can carry your product around in your pocket. Anyway, this isn't about what I do, but that's what my company does. I'm also an industry consultant, and so a lot of experience in this particular solving this particular problem, I guess you could say, of how do you get a service on a device. So I thought it might be helpful just to give a quick genesis of the session, and then I've asked the panelists to give a real quick introduction, and then we're going to go at it. We're going to have a good time talking about the subject. There's a lot to discuss here. So the genesis of this session starts actually at last year's Streaming Media in New York, and I found myself in a lot of discussions with various people who were basically wanting to try and discover how in the heck do I get my service, how to get my app on a device. There's so many different platforms, there's so many different technologies, different approaches. How do I know which is the best? I've got limited development resources. I think it's pretty well known that there's well over 100 different platforms that you really need to develop for if you kind of look at the popular devices on the market, and if you take into account all the various SDKs that even different TV manufacturers might have. And so even if you're a large organization, just maintaining those apps becomes very, very difficult, very resource intensive. So what we're going to try and do today is just talk about some of the approaches that the various companies represented are taking or have taken. In the case of LG, who's represented, they're going to tell us hopefully all about what your approach is, and so it's going to be good. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'd like Maxwell to introduce yourself, and then just move down, and we will kick it off.
Okay, so. My name is Maxwell Silva. I'm a senior video software engineer at the New York Times. I had more than 10 years of experience with software development. I spent the 5 years of my career working in video solutions. So I joined the New York Times video team in December last year, and to work to improve our video library and also create our APIs to make the people more engaged with our content and also create over-the-top device. Back in the days in Brazil, I worked for the huge companies in South America called TV Global and Terra Networks, built application to deliver the World Cup of 2010 with more than 150,000 of simultaneous users. And in 2011 at Terra, we built a new video experience for Terra Video Live product, bring 15 channels in 8D for the Pan American Games with picture-in-picture adaptive stream, and as a huge set of, not a huge set, but the first over-the-top device in a few smart TV. I think LG was the first one we worked on that because the development at that point was really friendly. And then next year, 2012, so we improved that project to the Olympic Games, where we delivered 36 8D channels with a huge layer of interaction in social network. Just so you know, we had something about 250,000 comments on social networks during the event period, something about 15 days. And yeah, since last December, I started to work at the New York Times, build the new apps, and something we are doing and in progress.
Great, thank you. Joe?
I'm Joe Zerillo. I'm the Senior Vice President of Content Technology for Major League Baseball Advanced Media and one of our Chief Technology Officers. My purview is really all of the things like connected devices, mobile, video on the web, most of what you would think about as far as media aspects of our business. And we've been in the connected device game for quite some time. We're on over 400 different SKUs at this point in time just in connected devices, about another 600 that we support on mobile. And we're in our 4th year of actually conveying our product over the connected device side of it. MLB.TV, our flagship subscription product, is in its 11th year of selling over-the-top content to folks, primarily, initially on the web, now increasingly on mobile and connected devices. And so we're, we've been at it a long time. It seems like, at some level, it seems like yesterday. At some level, it seems like we've been doing it for 50 years. But relative to a lot of other folks in the industry, we've got a lot of experience with it. And obviously, the challenge that we have versus a lot of other folks is all of our content is live. And live makes things a lot harder to do. You only get one shot at it. And so we've done, we have millions of subscribers at this point in time, and we've done very high concurrency events, well over 1 million concurrent folks watching over-the-top content at this point in time. So it's a good panel, good topic, and looking forward to it.
Awesome, good. Matt?
Yeah, so my name is Matthew Durgan. I've been in the CE industry for over 10 years, and for the last 5, I've been creating partnerships for LG for connected products. We've brought millions of devices into the market, and I've actually had the pleasure of working with Joe for MLB.TV and also Netflix and Hulu and Vudu and Amazon and the like. So definitely had a nice 5 years, seen a lot of changes, and looking forward to talking about what's to come for consumer electronics.
Great. All right. Last, certainly not least, Chris.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Ince. I'm a sales director for Sigma Designs. Sigma is an industry-leading semiconductor provider. Our silicon goes into all sorts of media appliances, from set-top boxes to media adapters to connected TVs. I've been with the company for 13 years and have been in digital video for about 25. So I've seen quite a bit of water go under the bridge, and it's pretty astounding how far the embedded device has come. We'll get into some more details about that, but we have an internal joke that as a semiconductor company, are we a hardware company or are we a software company? The reality is we have as many software engineers as we have hardware engineers. So we're very involved in porting various foundations, applications, and things that allow for the user experience to happen on these different media adapters.
Great. All right. Thank you. Well, you can see we've got just a fabulous group here. So as we go, if there is, I don't mind interruptions. So if we're on a topic and you've got a question that's relevant to what's being discussed right at that moment, slip your hand up. I may or may not see you. We will have a Q&A after, towards the end, so we will take time for questions. But just so you know, all right. I want to kick off. I want our first question, and we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but I think it's important. The word app often implies kind of a mobile device or mobile environment. And at least that's kind of the paradigm. You say an app, a lot of times we think mobile. But we're here talking about embedded CE devices. And I think it's helpful to kind of level set, and perhaps for some who may or may not be familiar with the differences of developing for an embedded device versus a mobile device. So let's just start with Maxwell. And just real quick, could you characterize from your perspective at the New York Times and the various platforms that you're developing for, what are the major differences between a mobile type environment and a CE device? So like a TV or a media player. And then we'll just go down the line.
Okay. For me, I think both of them has its challenges and it's something really different. For embedded device, at first you need to use with the 10-foot user experience, which is the user is in the lean back and is far away from the screen, and all the interaction happens in a remote control. Of course, there is some new remote control to pointing and also a new device with gestures and this kind of stuff. But almost all the interactions happened in a remote control. You have a lot of limitations. So your application should be as clean and direct to the point. And as my experience show, all the users don't want to do like so many things on that application. They do like quick action, like hate the content or mark as what later or shares, something like that. Because usually, if you are just in front of the TV or when you turn on a set-top box or even a game console, you are about like relax and enjoy the
Sure.
experience. Of course, that can change when you start to.
So from your perspective, it sounds like what you're saying is user interface is the user interface difference of a 10-foot versus
Yeah.
18-inch
Yeah.
or 24-inch is a major difference. But what I'm curious, give me a 60-second from a development perspective.
Okay.
What are some of the unique challenges, the approaches?
Yeah,
What's the difference between an embedded device and a mobile device?
Yeah, I think on the development perspective, you have a huge set of devices which support HTML5 and JavaScript, and some of them now they have the custom SDK and language like Roku, Apple TV, and game consoles. So when you talk about device, you can go in the same direction about create a web app base or create a native app. I think the huge challenge here is select the best range of device to work and choose the best technology for your team. If your team has all the skill sets to work on, example, Xbox, and you want they spend time to learn and to build your app, maybe it's not a good idea to start with this kind of application.
Okay,
And
good.
you have memory limitation and all that.
We're going to unpack some of that more, so good, thank you. Joe, I want to ask you a specific question. You're on, you said 400 SKUs. It's amazing. So you have a lot of experience. And is it safe to say that most of those are embedded devices?
Well, I mean,
Or even all of those?
I mean, it depends on what you define as embedded, right?
So you define it for us.
So I think that, to me, the real issue that you have is if you're, when you compare it to mobile, like to tie back to the previous question, there's a lot of similarities. And so some of the similarities are, if you're talking about something like an Xbox or a PlayStation, you're going to find a development environment that very much is akin to mobile. And it's not just the development environment for the device, it's also the ecosystem. So for example, in Xbox, you can potentially do in-app purchase like we do. And that would be very similar to iOS or Android. When you start talking about some of the lighter weight devices where it's HTML and it's kind of doing its own thing, then it looks a lot more like web app development. And so skill set wise, it's very diverse in what you're talking about. The question is something like an Xbox or a PlayStation embedded? I would consider the fact that it's probably not embedded. When you're not running native code on something, then or when you are running native code on something, I would consider it not embedded because you're effectively layering an application layer on top of whatever the native chip/ecosystem provides. When you're starting to talk about HTML5 rendering, and you're really just accessing an API over a JavaScript layer, then I would consider that to be a more classically embedded device. Just like I wouldn't call a phone embedded at this point anymore. They become their own computing ecosystem.
That's right. That's right. Good. Okay, perfect. Matt, I'm curious. So LG makes mobile devices as well as TVs, Blu-ray players. What I think of as embedded devices. Do you have separate teams building application frameworks for those two different kind of device types, and can you tell us just a little bit?
Sure. I mean, at this
about that?
point, it's true that the mobile environment is different than the TV, different than the living room. So the living room and the mobile team, is different at the technical layer, but at the business layer, it actually is converged into one team.
Okay, good, perfect. And Chris, I am curious. I know Sigma has really stepped in and is offering to make it easier for, in some cases, you're even kind of pre-integrating or you're porting popular apps onto your platform. So tell us how you're helping embedded device, people like us who use your products, how you're helping us. get apps on devices.
Right. One to the original question, I think we see as a big difference between the embedded device, which is changing, it's evolving, is the amount of horsepower that you have. Historically, in the set-top, in the media appliance, in the connected TV, whatever it might be, you've got a disparaging amount of horsepower and room that you can put your application. So, and you have different cost structures and integration structures. So you've got the difference between a $50 media device and a $500 mobile device or a computing device, which has different processing capabilities. So I think there's a difference there from a development perspective, from the amount of processing power that you have available to you. We're trying to close that gap from a silicon perspective. Now we have this, we call them SoCs, a system on chip, that has everything integrated, including your main processor, your graphics, your I/O, your video and audio decodes. It's got everything all in one very small, very inexpensive chip. But over the past few years, we've increased our processing power tenfold. So now we have the capability of processing HTML5 and Android and things on that embedded device. So per the last question, we're providing the foundational tools that allow our OEMs, our service providers, our customers to program to the chip, so very low-level drivers. We port foundations such as HTML5, Webkit, Android. Then there are certain instances where we'll have an application provider come to us, and we'll actually assist with the port of a Netflix or MLB or Vudu or Hulu or whatever it might be. So we really participate in the tools, the low-level libraries, APIs, and then in certain instances, the actual application itself.
Yeah, so one of the takeaways, if there's any publishers in the room and you're looking at how do I grow my device presence, the silicon vendors, increasingly, you should think about engaging with them because that's kind of ground zero. And so we're a device manufacturer, and we happen to use all Sigma processors. And for us, in some cases, if someone comes to us and says, hey, we'd love you to support our service, sometimes there's work that has to be done at the chip level, but it makes it that much easier if you're already pre-integrated or if they've already done some of that work. And so just kind of an early takeaway there in the discussion. Okay, let's talk about HTML5. But I also want to talk about Flash. And I'm curious your perspective. So, I think we're all hearing things that HTML5 is what you should be using, and some of us are hearing other things like Flash is dead. Now, I'm speaking of not when I say Flash, I'm not speaking of the security components of Flash. I'm speaking more of kind of the UI. So, how in the world does one go about picking a technology? Now, this is a very loaded question. It's very general. It's very broad on purpose because, again, if I'm sitting out here in the audience, I'm probably asking this question. So, I'd like to start with Matt, actually. And, what are some pointers? How do you go about picking a suitable technology if I'm trying to decide what to build my player in?
I mean, obviously, you would pick the technology that would, cover the most platforms, right? You'd want to have some kind of scale in that decision. And then and I'm not an engineer, so, I'm not going to be able to, explain the technical differences between them. But, what I've seen from a business perspective is I have seen overwhelmingly people choosing HTML5, so much that, it is unclear if Flash is going to continue to be supported for UI development, in the future. So, if it were my business, I would probably be looking at HTML5. I wouldn't be looking at Flash for HTML for UI development.
So Joe, you're on 400 devices. There may even be some devices that Flash is the only UI framework that's supported. What is your approach at MLB?
Well, I mean, I'm actually, the question itself in certain respects makes no sense to me because I wouldn't know anybody that would actually consider Flash alive. So Flash is definitely dead. I mean, it's dead all over the place. The only place that it has any amount of life right now is the browser still. And that's trickling away. I mean, we'll see what the W3C did. They made an interesting, and I think the right decision to try to tackle DRM inside of the video tag, which I think is an interesting thing. We'll see if anything comes of that. But what we say is our business is shifting increasingly mobile, increasingly connected device. And so the web as a percentage is still growing year over year, but as a percentage of our business is going down. And so we're really targeting these other platforms. As far as like development environment and things like that, I think that this is the inherent conflict to understand for the folks out there. It is confusing, and there is no silver bullet. And so anybody who like comes to you and says, "Hey, just use this," they're BSing you, because there is no silver bullet.
That's right.
And there's always a inherent conflict. Like there's enormous amounts of data, more specifically in the mobile space, but we're starting to see some of this research come out in the connected device space that talks about the quality of the interface, how native it feels, the interaction, et cetera, is directly related to your engagement time.
That's right.
So people are trying to put, Fazzizzle or whatever new internet widget social thing on the TV, and that's the thing that's going to drive engagement. That's ridiculous. The reality is that, when you build an iOS app, if it feels like an iOS app, it feels native, it acts like the other apps that are on that device, people are not going to monogamously use your device. I mean, we have tremendous usage in at-bat. Millions of people open it a day on our iOS devices. Right. But if that's the case, there's tens or hundreds, or not even tens, hundreds, or possibly even, increasingly you look at some of the other numbers like Google's talking about as far as activations, we're getting into the billions of people that are interacting with other apps that are native. And so if your stuff doesn't feel native, then it's out of place. And so HTML is an abstraction layer. And so it's a little bit of pick in the middle. So for example, like on Xbox or PlayStation, you want to do a native development that feels like a PlayStation app, that feels like an Xbox app, because those are big targets and you're going to get really rich UIs. When you start to talk about some of the smaller devices that don't quite have the penetration, then the question is, are you there or not? The economics are probably going to set it such that the only way that you are there is with an HTML5 solution. So even though you're sort of acquiescing on the user interface side that it's going to feel a little bit more abstract relative to the UI, it's the question of there or not. And so that's the way that you have to sort of look at the attenuation on it. The big platforms, you want to have very robust UIs, because if you sort of just take a full HTML5 approach, you wind up, in my opinion, generally slouching your way to failure, right? Where you've now said that you're not going to really kill those platforms. You're going to have something that's compromised from a UI standpoint.
That's right. Perfect. Great answer. Okay, Maxwell, curious about your perspective.
Yes. So if you talk about smart TV and web device at all, it's like make no sense. Create an application with Flash. As you said, if you are running and if you are building your application for a PS3, Xbox, a game console in general, I think even for other devices, you should create an experience which looks like the most of the application on that device. Like create the same experience, because when the user start to use that device and run one application there, and they change for another application, they can follow the same experience of that device. And yeah, if you talk about the browsers itself, HTML5, it's in draft. It's still not so good because few browsers doesn't support it really good. You have problems with captions, adaptive stream, live encode. I know at HTML 5.1 and the latest version of Chrome build, they implement a lot of great stuff like the Impact Dash clients, and now you have the WebRTC, which is a really good thing. But if you talk about the web, Flash is still present. They have, you can see Flash like in everywhere, like Vimeo, YouTube, even Facebook and other players. But when you talk about device, make no sense like start an application, develop an application, use Flash, or even think about that.
Okay, great.
No, I think on this, I think we also have to draw the distinction between if you're loading the entire application from scratch, that's just not going to work, right? It's a lot of data to flow into a device and then get processed. But if you package some of it inside the device, then the experience is going to start much better.
So Chris, do you have some experience to share around that with what Sigma's doing?
Yeah, we cater to the requirements of service providers, so cable companies, telcos, satellite service delivery. We cater to the set-top box OEMs, the television manufacturers, and we try to evolve our offering, our silicon, based on their requirements. And sorry to Adobe, but another vote for HTML5. Most everybody's asking for HTML5. So I would suggest there's value in that, in the sense that there's a community now that's pursuing that particular platform that you can leverage. There's continuity across platform. So that's another vote for HTML5.
So you mentioned something just a few minutes ago about Android support. Let's pivot the conversation and let's talk about Android. Joe, I liked what you said because I say it all the time. There is no silver bullet. So, and part of the point, by the way, that I'm trying to make here is by focusing on kind of HTML5. Now we're going to pivot to Android. Is that sometimes a discussion that we hear. Often the context is this is the way everything is going. Well, there's always an asterisk to that, and that asterisk has a whole lot of caveats. And so it's part of what we're just trying to unpack here. So let's pivot the discussion on Android, because in the circles I move in, I'm being increasingly told by some people, hey, we're developing everything in Android because that's how I'm going to get on every device. I'm getting all these handsets, getting all these tablets. There's devices now that are running Android, and it's kind of perceived as the new silver bullet. So starting with you, Chris, and then we'll kind of work back down the line. What's your experience, thoughts? Sigma is supporting Android now at the silicon level. So what are you seeing?
I have a hardware problem here, sorry. We pursued Android a couple of years ago, and we were actually able to port Android in its earlier stages onto our silicon, and it worked reasonably well. And performance is sometimes subjective. So there were customers who thought it was sufficient, it was okay. Others said, well, it's not running the same as it runs on a computer or a higher processing type of device. So we found that the request for Android was very strong about 2 years ago. And then as much as a year ago, it actually subsided to an extent. We have subsequently come out with much higher processing capabilities, and we are relaunching our Android endeavor. So we now have much more processing, much more memory, L2 cache, things that can accommodate the footprint of Android. So there is interest, and now we have the processing capability to take advantage. So it's perhaps coming full circle. We'll see.
Great. Matt, will there be a day, and I'm not looking for kind of, does LG believe in Android, but will there ever be a day when Android is running on a TV?
Not that I can see. Okay. I mean, to be frank with you, I think that,
Why is that?
Well, I think that LG's TV platform has evolved to the point where it's become very strong differentiator for us in the market. We do have a motion remote, which actually has a better experience than most smart TVs out there. Also, we've recently made an investment in WebOS. We purchased WebOS from HP. Now we have a development team in Silicon Valley who's developing for the 2014 platform using WebOS. And so, for us, we've kind of put our chips in, having our own platform that's based on web technologies, and I think that that's been working for us so far, so we're going to continue that strategy.
Great. Okay. Joe, any?
Well, I mean, I think, when you say that some people think that that's the future, that that's the way to do it, I would ask, if they've ever developed for Android.
Exactly.
Because that sounds like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. The fact is that the mobile environment in Android is actually the worst of all worlds. It's extraordinarily fragmented. Like from MLB, just to give you an example, every day I see about 4,000 different Android devices on the mobile web. 4,000 different devices. And I have to go, if I go to the actual most recent version of Android, I have to go into the 20s down the list to get the most recent version of Android. And so, even by Google's documentation, they put a pie chart that shows you that any given version of Android is no more than 30% penetrated.
That's right.
And they're not the new ones. And so it's a horrible, horrible experience right now. And they haven't really figured out how to lick that. I give Google credit, they're trying. If you look at I/O, the breaking up of the applications from the OS updates is an interesting way to go. but the foundation side of it is just tough. And so the notion that that's somehow going to be better on a TV, I haven't seen any clear guidance to that. There's no better process involved in the updates and pushing updates on TVs to make sure that Android versions stay current that's out there. And so if it is successful, it's only going to fragment like the phone. I don't think it's going to be successful because I think the biggest thing you have to ask yourself about Android is how much of Android as a whole do you not need on a TV? Right. And so the notion of like a reduced feature set version of Android, like Android TV, maybe that would make some sense. But I think what we saw when Google came out with Google TV was that the whole Android stack was just way, way bigger than it needed to be there. And it gets to what Chris was saying about what the processing requirements and all that sort of stuff are. And so in my mind, I think that it is almost unilateral that no device has ever, or no operating system has ever been developed for a device and then moved to another device and been really successful. I mean, if you look at what Apple did with Apple TV, it's a totally different environment, totally different operating system. If you look at what Windows did, they made tablets all along, but it really took them until Windows 8 to design an operating system to run on a tablet. And so Apple did the same thing. Obviously, tablets run iOS, they don't run Mac OS. And so it's very unlikely that an operating system is robust enough to get ported as a whole to another platform. That's right.
Okay,
It's
another great takeaway, right?
If I may, it's a great reality check because the lure is that you can develop once
Yes.
and you get cross-platform. And the reality is, as is pointed out, it's not that simple. It's a nice concept, it's a great lure, but is it reality? You have to figure it out.
So there's another point that we haven't talked about. Maxwell, curious if you can comment on this. There's the security and the DRM issues within Android. Do you run into that in the New York Times, with content that you can't properly protect?
Yeah, I have the opportunity to develop a few applications for Android, and yeah, it was like drive myself crazy because even the environment to develop that, it's something really confused, and everything, it's one device has the version 3.0.1 and another device has 3.2 and another 4, and everything is really complicated. Talking about DRM, it's something even worse. I have the opportunity to create an app who is something similar to Netflix, and we are trying to find solution to use real DRM, and at the end we find the Authentic, and they build some great SDK and great software for iOS, but for Android the experience was definitely not so good.
Yeah.
I have a lot of going back, and they improve. So in the security side for DRM, for the content, yeah, that Android.
Okay, so now that we've just shot down some of the popular silver bullets, are there any quick questions before we transition to another direction? Okay, I will do a Q&A at the end. Oh, yes.
I just have a question on the DRM. You guys mentioned about the DRM. Which particular one you guys use, like Microsoft or Apple or Wi-Fi?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question for the video. So if I heard the question right, it was which DRM,
Yeah, which DRM is?
and it was aimed at Maxwell. Okay, which DRM?
Yeah, it was Microsoft DRM. We are using PlayRed solution to stream the videos using our Authentic system. And as I said, for iOS, they create that SDK which works like really good and was really fast to build the application. But when you start to develop the application for Android, yeah, well, it starts to be a mess. Like some device, they said, oh, we support 2.2 plus, and when we start to test, we see like some huge problems, even the most recent version of Android. So it was.
I mean, maybe to break it up a little bit, specific to DRM, like DRM gets back into the silver bullet. So when somebody's like, hey, if you get this, it's one thing if you're over-the-top provider or you're a service provider and you're trying to get rights. And then in certain respects, going with Play Ready or Widevine is a route to check a box. Maybe that's the right thing, maybe it's not. We're a little bit more direct, right? Like I put the stuff in consumers' hands, I got to deal with folks stealing it, I have to deal with my content. It's my content. I don't have to answer for anybody except for the business and technical requirements. And so for me, it's a little clearer. I don't like either of them, quite honestly. I don't like Play Ready, I don't like Widevine for a number of reasons. But I think that it's important when you talk about DRM to break it into two pieces. There's the wire protocol of DRM, and then there's what happens on a client, right? The wire protocol for us is all HLS AES. So it's all encrypted. you'd be hard-pressed if you inspected it on the wire to find the difference between PlayReady, Widevine, and HLS AES. They're all cipher blockchain for the most part. They're all, there. We like HLS AES because it's basically ubiquitous, but it's all and open and all that sort of stuff. But it's also one of those things where it was also designed from the ground up for live, which neither of those other two were. They were really VOD formats that got converted in some level. But when you talk about the other aspect of DRM, which is the client tampering, that's where other technology comes in. So for example, on Android, because of all the issues with security, we're using Erdetto to protect the HLS AES on that platform. iOS is pretty sufficient. Like, it's got some pretty good anti-tampering built into the operating system, so you don't have to worry about it as much. It's always, DRM and security is always this bar, right, where you need just enough to make it really difficult for people to do, but there's an attenuation that has to happen in the friction that you're going to cause the user in order to consume the product. And so in order to stick the landing, you really want to be in that sweet spot where you have just enough of it to keep the honest people honest, and not so much of it that the honest people are going to become dishonest. And that's where you really need to go for DRM, in my opinion.
Great.
So you mentioned about the Erdetto, right?
I'm sorry?
So the product you're using is Erdetto, right?
Well, Erdetto does the client tampering. So again, the wire protocol is HLS AES. So there's no other format on top of it. But ActiveCloak, which is their DRM tamper resistance, if you will, on the client, we're using only on Android because it's the platform that needs something like that the most. But on all the rest of the platforms, we're using basically operating system provided or in some cases silicon provided security countermeasures for anti-tampering.
So I wasn't really planning to go, and we're not going to get off on the DRM topic, but it is important. Again, companies like Sigma, the silicon guys, you have a secure. Just real quick, since we're on the topic, tell us about what you've done at the chip level to ensure device anti-tampering.
So we have in the silicon, there are 6 dedicated processors inside the chip. The main processor, video decoder, audio decoder, graphics backend, and we have a secure processor that's dedicated to security. And then we have the third parties, be it Widevine, Verimatrix, NDS, all these different security companies who want to put their mechanism inside that secure processor. So we lock down that chip so that using that mechanism, you can't break it. You can't steal that information. So we provide the mechanism, the hardware to do that. From a choice perspective, we're agnostic. All the different security measures have their own business models, and people have different preferences. So from our perspective, we basically support everything. It's your choice which makes the most sense from a business model perspective.
Okay, so we could have a whole nother session on that, but all right. So let's talk about portability of apps. And really what all this comes down to is putting myself in the role of a publisher. How do I get maximum coverage with a finite amount of development resources? And so I'm curious, I'd like to start, Maxwell, with you. To hear what you think the best strategy is for reducing development costs and complexity, but yet, still maximizing the broadest coverage. So real quick, just a minute or two, what are some strategies you'd like to share?
Yeah, okay, that's just a really good question. I think right now for you get in a huge set of device, you should start building something HTML5 and JavaScript, even because you can also use a core of that application or a few components and share it in another device. So with that, you have a presence on that device, and you can, after the time, watch one of them and see if they need your attention, spend more money to create a native app, or something specific for that thing.
So your answer would be kind of a technology approach. Yes. HTML5 can be highly leveraged, though it won't run on everything, but the work can be leveraged. And so, okay, Joe, what's your what's your best strategy for reducing development costs, increasing coverage?
Well, I think that what Maxwell said, I think is probably right. Like, if you're going to make one bet, HTML5 is the bet to make. I look at it very differently. It's not about coverage, right? We're not playing, checkers here where we're trying to cover the most squares. What we're trying to do is make the most money, right? At the end of the day, we're all about profitability at some level, whether that's advertising supported or subscription supported, like a lot of our products. We really want to maximize revenue. And so in my mind, like where it is the ability, if you try to lever just one thing, like I want my development costs to be as low as possible, then you're gonna probably succeed in that pursuit, but you're also gonna potentially leave revenue on the table. So I look at it as like, how do you be the most profitable you can? And for that, what I would say is, understand your content and your audience. And once you sort of understand the demographics, then you can start to plot where you need to go. And so for example, if you look at Netflix, they release their stuff publicly, and it's pretty consistent with what we see. PlayStation's the #1 platform. That's the way it is. And you put PlayStation plus Xbox plus a couple of the other connected devices together, you get a pretty good footprint. Now, they're all independent development efforts, but that may be the way to maximize revenue as opposed to penetration. And so, I'm a believer in, it's one of those things, it's not what you do, it's what you don't do. Anybody can do everything and cover all the squares, and then you get this sort of mishmash of stuff that doesn't quite work awesome on a bunch of different platforms. I'd prefer to have, great product on many, many platforms, and then start to extend. And then I think HTML I see as a bridge to get to those next, layer of devices, those next 300 devices, 400 devices that are out there. But when we went for our strategy, started with the core products that we needed to. LG was early on in that process too, as a core partner on the connected device side for TVs. And then, that's evolved into HTML5, and I think the WebOS was a smart acquisition on their part. But that's where I really think it goes to, is trying to come up with a quality interface. Because if you're on a platform, but your interface is bad, and people don't have a good time using your product, then you're unlikely to get much engagement there anyway. And so you're there, but what have you really accomplished?
What's the point?
Right.
It's interesting because I made notes here. Is the best approach technology-based? And your answer was a little bit, it's technology-based. Or is it market penetration-based? And Joe, you're basically saying it's more market penetration-based. So of those two, or is there a third option?
Well, actually, I think that's really really good way of saying it. I'll say it from the LG perspective.
Yeah.
Because LG is in a unique position because it's one of the largest TV manufacturers, especially if you look globally. In the U.S., we're #2 market share position. But even though we put a few million devices into the market every year, we're still not at the level of of a PlayStation or a mobile. So you can't just say, you're developing on my platform because I have this giant footprint. We have a very good footprint. But I think what we've done on our side is to try to reduce some of the fragmentation in a few ways. HTML, was clearly, a big way to reduce fragmentation. But also, we co-founded the Smart TV Alliance, where, we basically created a base layer platform, and then we spread it out, with other companies like Panasonic and Sharp and Toshiba, so that at least the beginning stages of developing on a connected TV that's part of the Smart TV Alliance should be exactly the same. And then there are going to be other layers of differentiation, potentially like UI or remote control, but that should be a small part of the development. The core development should stay the same, so that you reduce fragmentation and you also try to keep expanding your footprint. And that is really what solves the equation that you're talking about.
Great. What's Sigma's perspective?
The concept of developing once and leveraging it across platform is very appealing. We've discussed some of the challenges in that. One thing that we're trying to do is create silicon that can, in and of itself, cross the platforms. So, for example, we acquired a silicon company that does TV silicon. Our traditional focus was set-top box silicon. So now we're merging the two, and we're coming out with a line of products that one piece of silicon will go in a set-top media adapter and a TV. So currently you get that cross-platform capability. So in theory, you could develop once, create your software, and it's identical silicon from platform to platform. We're not alone. Our competitors are doing the same thing. So I think we're going to see that more.
So we're seeing these third-party portal companies spring up, and they're identifying the difficulties of getting reach, and so they're building in some cases platforms or solutions. And I'm just curious, are any of their claims to be able to get the broad coverage and to make it so easy that anybody can publish and kind of once you deploy in their portal, you're on, 300, 400. I mean, I've seen some outrageous claims. Are these real claims, or are they empty promises? And, is there anything, if I was approached today by a portal company, should I talk to them? Should I be careful? Just give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what you talk about from a portal company. There's like portal companies that are technology companies that give you enablement. And then there are sort of folks that want to aggregate content. Those are very different things. The aggregation of content is another whole panel that,
Yes.
we should probably have at some point in time. The technology side of it, though, for me, gets down into what is your goal? Because I haven't seen, when you look at a lot of these folks that are out there, and a lot of them are good people doing good work, but I haven't seen any real success stories with somebody that's gone that route. So I haven't seen the Wall Street Journal article talking about how these guys are making money out of this because they use portal company X. And so that seems to me to be a little suspect. And I think the nature of it gets back to that lowest common denominator interface. Like, you can do something that's very portable, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's very satisfying. And those are sort of two things. And the portal companies are just a layer of abstraction. I mean, for whatever the vitriol was in the Steve Jobs sort of open letter that he wrote to Adobe about abstraction, there's a kernel of total reality in that, which is as you start to layer abstraction, it kills innovation in the layers below it. Because now, just think about it like, let's just say that you use a portal company and you want to get everywhere, and Xbox has, Connect, and you want to use some of the voice and gesture commands. Well, that portal company is probably not going to support it because it's not going to use the platforms. And so now you have an Xbox variant of that portal. And boom, 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 and now,
You're back to fragmentation.
You're back
to
that. And so I think that, it depends on what the business goal is. If the business goal is to be able to check the box and say you're on all these platforms, portal is probably a great option. If the business goal is to really drive engagement with users and make some money off of the thing, then you really got to just accept the fact that it's hard, Rarely are things that are worth pursuing easy, and this is one of those examples, I think.
That's great. Any other comments, perspectives? Maxwell, does the New York Times have experience working with
No,
portals?
not yet, but my experience showed every time I look for this kind of service, I get to one client who has present in the whole set of devices. They say to me, okay, we are allowed to use that application for all of this. And yes, you are totally right when you said this kind of, when you use this kind of abstractions, you limit it to what they are building to make this thing like general for all the range of devices they are working on it, and you can create something really new and use new features when the vendors start to release the new SDK and new
And maybe just to follow up just one second, I think that this is one of the things that maybe makes some sense to people. Because I think that what you really touched on is important. In the entire history of computer science, we've had a real problem defining how to separate a presentation layer from a business layer. I mean, that's the real struggle in development, no matter what kind of development you're doing, is where do you put the smarts, right? Because ideally what you'd like in this sort of make-believe unicorn land that we're talking about, all the presentation layer stuff sits up here, all the business stuff sits down there, there's a very clear line of demarcation, and you go on about your way. But the reality is that these languages, these presentation layers, are not well suited to that. And so business logic starts to matriculate up into the whole situation. And now, every time that you redo presentation, you're actually also redoing things like sort order and business logic that's very difficult to keep tamped down into that other layer. The portal is now just another wedge of murk in between those two. So they're going to cross-pollinate enough, and now you get this middle segmentation layer, which is, I think, kind of what Maxwell was alluding to, which I think is totally true too. So it's tough.
Okay. So you touched on an excellent segue there. With what we do, we're involved with a lot of middleware companies. This more on kind of the broadcast TV side, IPTV. So slightly different, but there is some talk around kind of cloud UIs, and everything. And again, the cloud is the buzzword, right? So cloud, but it is an interesting architecture. It does present some interesting options, also challenges. So again, throw it out there in terms of, and you were just touching on it, Joe. Kind of where the presentation layer sits on the device. I guess let's start with you, Joe. What are your thoughts on that? And are you looking at even re-architecting some of your solutions?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, again, you know, cloud is an awesome buzzword. You know, what it means to different people is very, very different things.
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, what we definitely do, and whether you call it cloud, private cloud, even owned and operated data center, is the notion of sort of a mashup that sous chefs things that these various clients are going to need. And so, for example, our architecture is based upon, like, when I put out something like an EPG of games, where I have state changes and who's playing whom and scores and things like that, that all have to be kind of syndicated in real time. We use a mashup layer to create files like that can be specific to a particular device. And so, like, if Apple TV needs a plist file or something like that, we can transform that data into that file. And so that notion of matching that kind of stuff up in a cloud environment, I think, is tremendously valuable and really best practice to put your own abstraction layer in between kind of the publish side of it and the consumption side of it. You really do need a disintermediation layer there. When we talk about, like, some of the guys that are on the other, you know, super extreme of it, where you're saying, like, I'm actually going to broadcast the UI to them in a pseudo streaming format, very much like GameFly or somebody would do with playing a video game remotely on a cloud service. Again, it gets back to, I don't understand, because if, much like, you know, the reason that something like GameFly works is because, like, when you play that game on a PlayStation, you're, you know, like, or I shouldn't say GameFly, but some of the other video gaming guys, is if you play that game and you're on a PlayStation, it feels like a PlayStation because you're playing a PlayStation game, it's cool. But if you have this other console, then you're in this no man's land of, now I'm broadcasting something and taking way more bandwidth than I should be. I'm competing with the bandwidth for the video, which is going to cause me to render the video not as well as I could. And by definition, I have lowest common denominator interface then going down the pipe to those devices. And so, to me, it seems like the cloud side of it doesn't make a lot of sense. The sort of mashup to create an HTML interface, for example, that may be tweaked for various different platforms does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, cool. Matt, LG.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I said this earlier. I think that, you know, if your intention is to bring your entire application, UI, whatever, to the cloud, I think, you know, you're going to basically be telling your consumers to wait for, you know, 30, 40 seconds before they can have their experience with you. And consumers aren't going to want to do that. So that's what app stores, you know, were made for, is to package up that material and to download it once into the TV, or, you know, we'll embed it into the TV depending on, you know, what our deal is with a particular partner. You know, but once you've embedded, you know, that UI layer or portions of that UI layer into the device, then other bits, which can be, you know, flexible and need to change more often, can come into the cloud. And that seems to be a pretty optimal environment for people to have flexibility over their business, but also performance for their consumer.
Great. Those are really good insights. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. I'd like to ask each of you to just share briefly, 60 seconds, what is the number one thing you learned building your service, your product, or a takeaway from your unique perspective? So real quick, go down the line, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for some, you know, final questions, and we'll wrap it up. So Max, we'll start with you.
My experience showed me, like, UI should be really fast, because in 2011, just 50% of the smart TVs was really connected, and people was not using that because they think that is slow. And it's a completely different experience than watch a TV on channel. So if your application take a while to load and you don't have engagement, like it will not work. So I think if you want to about something really good, you start to think about how to engage your users, and because people want to know what their friend doing, what their friend watching, and if you create one application, use some techniques like transmedia, start downloading, and start to work with second screen apps to give the user more than just the video, just that content.
So what you've learned is so almost social engagement is very important.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Joe.
I think that what it really comes down to is, at all turns, you should be asking yourself, what is the minimal amount of functionality that should be in your app? And so a lot of times it's very easy to say, oh, we need this, and we need to check this box, and we need to do this, or a sponsor wants that. And the reality is that simple, clean, functional app design is the hallmark of success. And if you look at the apps that are in the Apple Store, you know, App Store, which is by far the most mature, what you see is apps that are clean, functional, you know, well done are the ones that are economically successful. And so you always have to figure out, like, is this the one feature that I really just don't need to put in? Is this a 2% feature or 3% feature? And the other benefit of that is if you can really be critical about what you're putting in and not just try to follow the trends and not just say like, oh, well, so-and-so did this, so it must be successful for me too. If you can really get that feature set nailed, then you have less support and less fragmentation to deal with, et cetera, because you're not porting 1,000 features, you're porting the 5 that people actually care about. And then you can grow it over time. You know, you can listen to your customer and continue to mature the product as we have, add in more features to different platforms over time. But trying to just catch all and do everything that everybody else is doing is the road to having an app that's fundamentally unusable.
And for me, I think it's, I always appreciate when I meet with a new company and I get the sense immediately that they know what it takes to win for themselves, right? I think that, you know, if you need to win on the sidewalk, then, you know, you want to be on a mobile device. If you need to win in the living room, especially if you want to live in, or if you want to win in the living room for 7 years, which is the life cycle of the TV, then you need to understand what the connected TV space is going to do. And so, you know, for me, I always like to have, you know, a company with a plan that wants to win in the living room, you know, then I want to help that company.
It's another fabulous takeaway. Know where you need to win. Okay, Chris.
I was thinking along the same lines of as Joe. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. We get crazy requests from people, and it's funny, service providers, as an example, will ask us for 3D graphics capability. And we ask them why. What are you going to do with your 3D graphics, and how much processing do you think you need to do if you're 3D? And they can't answer the question. It's a checkbox, and they have to have 3D graphics, and they want to incorporate this wonderful user interface. And the reality is it gets complicated. To Joe's point, personally, I think you need to keep it simple and easy to use. And things like 3D, while good for some things, can make it more confusing.
Excellent. Wow, well, this has been fabulous. So any quick questions? We have about 5 minutes. Yes.
Anybody have any experience with Uplink? It sounds like a portal, maybe a single bit rate screen where you can code and distribute 1 or 2 /easy processes. It sounds like they're very low price, but Uplink.
Yeah.
Disney
So,
ABC started to use it.
Yeah, no, I didn't heard of them. I think they're a good company. I think that when you start talking about, I mean, they're really more of a CDN when you get right down to it. I mean, they're like a cloud edge CDN. I would put them like in the equivalent product of, say, Aqua HP, which is CDN plus a feature set of transcoded in the cloud. I personally am not a big believer in that approach. It's certainly enticing, and for some folks that sort of video is a hobby, I think that's right. So if you have a little bit of video and it's something you're not really going to be able to economically justify having real resources behind, it's probably a good way of getting into the market. You know, Uplink versus Akamai HD, whatever. I mean, part of that's feature set, price, a lot of things go into that equation. I personally don't believe that anybody who's serious about it should be taking that approach. Because at some point in time, you got to look at history, right? When you talk to a content provider who's a traditional TV broadcaster, one of the things they hate is the fact that people monkey with their signal along the signal path, right? And so if you're on cable system X, people are like, why does my such and such channel look like crap? And they're like, oh, well, you know, it's distribution, blah, 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 blah. And so the notion of having something at a technical level, I'm not saying from a company, it's a very different economic model, but having a disintermediation layer where I don't know the exact bits that my customer should be consuming or is consuming, how do I actually provide customer service? And so they call up and they're like, it's fuzzy. You're like, I don't know, you know. Like, I didn't transcode it, my plan looks great, you know. And so I think that you have to care about what the customer is, and I have to know I can run a test, you know, I can curl an endpoint, I can get a decoder log capture, I can do something like that, and compare it to what I'm sending so I can start to isolate where the problems are. And I think that those guys, again, while a quick route in, the more that you hand off to somebody else, the less you have in your control, the less likely you are to be able to actually service your customer. And so, as I said, I think that, you know, for folks that are looking for video as a hobby, or, you know, like a real sidecar to the business, not the principal business, is probably interesting. But if you're really talking about providing service and making money and really trying to do some stuff, you got to know about it. You just have to. It's the ante for the game.
So I know that Uplink is here, and I know they also just announced that they're going to deal with Disney and ABC. So, you know, so it's one perspective. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so you guys talked several times about the chaos that's on different platforms. I mean, Android is not Android. It's completely fragmented, version to version, the media players change. it's complete chaos. And even HTML5 doesn't really have a single driver of, I guess, the technology. How are you guys dealing with this problem strategically to push these guys to say, hey, look, forget about what version of Android I did. On the next version, I don't want any of the apps that I did in the previous version to work on this next version. Or for the HTML5 guys to just say, hey, you know, how do I figure out my performance requirements so I know that I get the proper performance on any device or, you know, through a protocol or something? How are you strategically dealing with that tops down, if at all?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question again for the benefit of the video. Just capture it, crystallize it here. So the question is, with all the fragmentation of HTML5 and Android, how are you working to try and solve that? I'm summarizing.
Yeah,
that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's two-faceted. Like, when you talk about the presentation layer, that's a dicey thing. But when you talk about core technologies like video tag, you were mentioning in the HTML5 spec, I think for me, the way that we try to tackle it is we bring people to a common platform. Like, I have one kind of stream, right? You want our content, and fortunately we're a big content provider and people tend to like baseball. It's HLS. I'm not making a smooth version of it for you. And so, what we try to do is force people to open standards, because that's where really the innovation is. Like, if you look out there, nobody wins generally in the browser wars. That's not a good consumer thing. Nobody wins in the streaming codec wars. Nobody wins about that. H.264 did a good job of getting the shop in order, getting the intellectual property sewn up, and licensing it out to people at a reasonable price. The reasonable price being one of the biggest components of that whole thing.
Yeah.
And we have ubiquity. And now people can make H.264 content. Look at how much innovation that's spurred. If we were still dealing with like what this codec is, what that codec is, which is why I'm a huge detractor from WebM, is like the notion of why do we need another one of these things. And the H.265 roadmap looks great, right? It's going down there. And so I think that's the thing, is concentrate on the smallest amount, the lowest level of openness that you can focus on that is a standard, and then let the rest of it sort of mature as the way it is, as opposed to trying to adopt this enormous standard that will never get done. And if it does, it's going to be designed by a committee. A committee may be able to decide a very small API, but the bigger that the breadth of what they're trying to decide, the more likely they are to have a really bad standard.
Yes.
We're a company that are debating whether or not to use a portal company. We deliver about 5 hours of content a day, free and also premium. You were saying not to use a portal company if we're really invested in it and we want to build it ourselves. So how do we go about doing that? Do we hire a company as a freelance to help build it and then have one person maintain it? Or do we hire an engineer in-house? What would you recommend?
I would say that, like,
Okay, can I repeat the question? Yeah, sorry. This for the sake of video, because I actually had this question I was going to pose, and we just ran out of time. Really, the question is, how do you go about hiring a developer if you're a content publisher? It sounds like you have content, right? So do you use a portal company, do you hire a developer? How do you find that? How do you make that choice? Right? Did I summarize? Okay.
I mean, personally, like, for the type of volume of content that you're talking about, I would hire somebody, like a service provider. And so we do a lot of third-party business. I do about 15,000, events outside of baseball a year through various different folks.
Yeah, Joe, give a quick plug for the fact that people probably aren't aware of the other side of your business.
Yeah, no, I mean, we run a lot of the very large events. We help our friends ESPN with their ESPN3 product, doing the live streaming there. We've done March Madness for the past couple of years. We do a lot of stuff for CBS. There's a lot of big folks that you would expect that would have sort of relations to us, and some folks that are totally off the beaten path. We do that type of thing. There's also a lot of other companies that do that as well. I think that ultimately what you want is that whoever it is has got to be in the end-to-end business at some level, right? That doesn't mean that they need to own the CDN or every piece of the ecosystem, but like, if you're going to try to do something, I would not be in for half measure. So if I would personally recommend, if you hired somebody like us or one of our competitors, at least that's what they do for a living. And you can sort of rely on the fact that there's economy of knowledge scale in providing that sort of content. As opposed to like a portal is, to me, a very odd, like one of the uplink, and again, those guys are interesting. Akamai has a very similar product that's pretty interesting. But it seems odd to just pick that one thing off, right? Because now, like, those guys are not necessarily providing the player, or they're not necessarily providing the actual sourcing code. So now you still have to solve those problems, and now you're cobbling it together, and it's like the worst of all worlds because you have not a lot of control and still a lot of moving parts. So if you're really not going to commit to doing more of that than less, and managing the breadth of that stuff, then you should just hire somebody to do it that does that for a living. And there's downward pressure in the market we face every time that we bid. And so I think that market is maturing. I mean, Brightcove, those kind of guys, they're all out there. And you just got to find the right one that understands your business, understands, like, it sounds like you want to propose the premium and the kind of pay product, somebody who has experience with that. And then go that way, because at least somebody does that for a living. What you hate is everybody doing it as a hobby.
Yeah. And you had a question.
By any chance, do you know if the other players will join the Smart TV Alliance?
Do I know if other TV manufacturers or other companies are going to join? Well, I know that we're currently in discussions with other companies joining as well. So yeah, I'm sure there are going to be new entrants into the Smart TV Alliance.
Okay, so one more question. We're already going a little over, but it seems this is good. One more, quick one. All right, we'll wrap it up. Okay, let's thank our panelists.